All right, so the big news this week is on Thursday, Dr. Christine Ford is going to appear before the Senate Judiciary Committee for a 10 o'clock meeting. She's going to testify. But before we get to that, the New Yorker and Ronan Farrow has got and it's on the cover, here's the other paper in New York, a new Kavanaugh sex shocker. Ronan Farrow apparently has spoken to a woman by the name of Deborah Ramirez, who was a freshman at Yale with Mr. Kavanaugh, and she alleges there was a drinking game. Mr. Kavanaugh allegedly exposed himself to her. However, there are a lot of things that are unknown. For instance, the New Yorker could not confirm with any of the eyewitnesses that she named whether or not it happened. And she admits that her memory is foggy because she was drinking.
So, yeah, and apparently she'd spoken extensively with her attorney about whether she should come forward or not, because she knew if she does have to go in front of the Senate, then she's going to have to really be talking a lot and talking about the holes in her story because of her drinking that
Yeah, and by the way, she's been through 6 background checks, high school, college, and now all of a sudden this emerges as Brett Kavanaugh. But Dino Ewing, Louisa Gary, Dan Murphy, all disputed Ramirez's account. Quote, "We were the people closest to Brett Kavanaugh during his years at Yale. He was a roommate for some of us. We spent a great deal of time with him, including the dorm where this incident took place. They said it did not take place." Here's a quote from the New Yorker. Ramirez acknowledged that there are significant gaps in her memory, because she was drunk that night of the evening, and that if she ever presents her story to the FBI or members of the Senate, she will inevitably be pressed on her motivation for coming forward after so many years and questioned about her memory, giving her drinking at the party.
Keep in mind, this woman is calling for the FBI to investigate, as are a number of top Democrats. They say, look, we can't have the vote until we thoroughly investigate it. Meanwhile, the White House says this is the latest in a coordinated smear campaign. The claim is denied by all those who were said to be president. And the White House is standing behind Mr. Kavanaugh.
Yes, they are. And the statement from him this morning, he says, this alleged event from 35 years ago did not happen. The people who knew me then know that this did not happen and have said so far. This is a smear, plain and simple. I look forward to testifying on Thursday about the truth and defending my good name and reputation for character and integrity I've spent a lifetime building against these last-minute allegations. And that's just it. The timing. Is this a drip, drip, drip? Come up by the Democrats, trying to delay everything until the midterm elections and really fire up their base, saying Republicans are bullies, although Republicans are the ones saying we want to hear from Mrs. Ford.
Well, it sounds like we're going to hear from somebody else, too, because in addition to Dr. Ford is going to testify on Thursday, and then you've got the second woman, Ms. Ramirez. Michael Avenatti, Stormy Daniels' lawyer, says that he has credible information about Mr. Kavanaugh and Mark Judge, who he was classmates back in high school. And some of the allegations are in the paper today, and they are disgusting.
Brett Kavanaugh also said, by the way, if this helps, I'll release my schedule for 1982 between the camps I was at and between what I was doing with college visits. I don't even know if I had time even to go to a party like this. So we'll look forward to hearing from him. James Roach was a roommate with Kavanaugh at the time of the alleged incident and is now the CEO of a software company. Says, quote, "Debbie and I became close friends shortly after we both arrived at Yale. She stood out as being exceptionally honest and gentle. I cannot imagine her making it up." But the question is, you have people who say it didn't happen. You have other people say it doesn't sound like her to make it up. So is this enough? You wonder why if this meant so much and it was so damaging, which allegedly it has been, why wouldn't it come out earlier? Why at this point? Why would 4 Dems know about it, 2 Dems investigating it, but the chairman of the Judiciary Committee didn't even know about it until yesterday when Ronan Farrow broke it?
And that Senator Chuck Grassley has spoken out, too. He says this: yet again, Senate Democrats actively withheld information from the rest of the committee only to drop information at politically opportune moments. It increasingly appears that they are more interested in a political takedown than pursuing allegations through a bipartisan and professional investigative process. Of course, we will attempt to evaluate these new claims.
Meanwhile, Dianne Feinstein, the senator who Charles Grassley said has broken the rules, said this: Thursday's hearing should be canceled in light of a disturbing new allegation of sexual misconduct against Brett Kavanaugh. The FBI must investigate all allegations.
Why would you cancel Thursday? Because there's another allegation Sunday, you cancel Thursday? You shouldn't actually start moving forward?
It's all about politics, and it's all about now, given this new ammunition for the Democrats, they are trying to delay Mr. Kavanaugh's confirmation. They would love, and the vote total right now, I think it's uncertain. You don't know exactly how it's going to go. But ultimately, what the Democrats would like to see is it push so far past the midterms, then they would perhaps have at least control of one of the houses of the Congress, and it would change the dynamic completely.
But not the Senate. I mean, if they lose the Senate, whether they win or lose the Senate, it wouldn't matter what's happening in the House. Their hope is the Democrats would be so motivated by the opportunity to maybe have the majority in the Judiciary Committee that they would get the vote and turn the Senate.
We had some new information over the weekend that Dr. Ford had added a new attorney to her lineup, who was Andrew McCabe's
first accuser.
Bromwich, the first accuser, and adding to a list of attorneys already that have connections to being anti-Trumpers resistors.
Okay, so you've got Senator Mazie Hirono, who has been front and center during these allegations, and listen to what she says about what's going on right now.
I put his denial in the context of everything that I know about him in terms of how he approaches his cases. As I said, his credibility is already very questionable in my mind. When I say that he's very outcome-driven, he has an ideological agenda. It's very outcome-driven, and I can sit here and talk to you about some of the cases that exemplifies his, in my view, inability to be fair.
Okay, fine. That's an interesting prospect. I just should point out, too, if we are going to, it's hard to easily get confused, but now, on the first accuser, 4 people have come out that evidently at the party and said they have no recollection of Dr. Ford's account on their side. So
right, and according to the Ronan Farrow story, it doesn't sound like there's any of the eyewitnesses who were at this alleged party.
Does that matter? I would think it matters a lot.
Yeah, you would think so. Friends, if you are having a hard time going, who's this name and that name, it's a lot to keep up with. FoxNews.com has a really good breakdown. Don't change the channel. Stay on with us, but you can follow along there.
Ultimately, Chris Christie, who used to be a federal prosecutor, he has looked at what's going on right now, the political dynamic, which is happening at the same time they're trying to confirm this guy, and had an observation that a lot of people are making. Listen to this.
No matter what happens here, Judge Kavanaugh, after these proceedings, isn't going to jail. But you are taking his career. And the idea that this guy could, in fact, go back to the Court of Appeals and continue to serve after this, if he were not confirmed, I think is really unlikely.
I think that's a great point. And all these accusations, whether they're 100% right or 100% wrong, they would have been 100% valid when he was in the Circuit Court of Appeals. It would have been 100% valid when he was on the short list to take the Gorsuch seat. 100% valid was he was on the short list to do this thing. But it seems like after all the hearings and 30 hours of hearings and weeks of debates, then this comes up after it's done in the fall, right before the midterm election. It's impossible to look at this case, I would think, and not think timing matters.
Well, or, let's bring in Andrew McCarthy, former U.S. Assistant Attorney for the Southern District of New York. He's also a contributing editor at National Review and a Fox News contributor. Andy, Dianne Feinstein sat on Dr. Ford's letter for 2 months. Why?
To delay. This is all about delay. It's basically about 2 things, Steve. It's about delaying this as long as they can. Notice that Senator Feinstein is the one today saying put off the hearing on Thursday. The whole idea is to take these allegations, which wouldn't even get into court. I want to say they'd be laughed out of court. They're so thin. In fact, you wouldn't even come into court with anything like this. But the idea is to say, these are very serious allegations. They need to be investigated by the FBI to delay this. And the other very important thing here is the message is to every single conservative that if you try to crash our party, this is what we're going to do to you. Right now, as they see it, this is about the ideological bent of the Supreme Court, maybe for the next generation, and they are going to fight this tooth and nail to prevent Kavanaugh from being in that seat.
I'm all for fighting, but I'm all for justification and a legal fight. My question to you is, Andy, when they do these background checks, would high school chicanery or like this come up? Would college drinking come up? Should this have come out already? Even before Don McGahn told the president, I think this is somebody who belongs on the short list. Why did all this survive the scrutiny up until last week?
Well, Brian, it's important to remember these allegations, even if there was a lot more evidence for them than there is, are not prosecutable. The purpose of a background investigation is not to develop evidence to prosecute someone. It's to note for the record that these incidents are out there, to talk to important witnesses, and to let the Senate weigh this information as it exercises its constitutional advice and consent function. The idea here is not to do what the Democrats are suggesting, which is to do a criminal investigation. What we have here is one of the most qualified nominees who's ever been up for one of these seats, who's actually written 300 appellate opinions in a dozen years on what many regard as the second most important court on the United States. They have more than enough information to decide whether he's qualified to fill this seat or not.
I want to get your legal take on this as well, something Brian alluded to just a moment ago. A headline from the New York Times says Kavanaugh to give Senate calendars from 1982 to back up the denial. Legally, how will that hold up?
Well, it's as valuable as virtually anything else here. I mean, if it turns out that he kept the calendar entries in real time, it actually would be more valuable evidence than people who were trying to search through the mists of time for their memories of things that happened between 30 and 40 years ago.
Andy, let me ask you about the political dynamic. I've heard the name of one Republican senator who's kind of leaning toward a no on this particular thing. So I think you can say his confirmation might be up in the air at this point. But if he were voted down, what does this do for the Democrats going into the election? What does it do for the Republicans going into the election? Because you would think it would motivate Republicans in a big way. But then again, by the same token, it would happen for the Democrats.
Well, it certainly would motivate both sides, Steve. But I think the thing here is the Democrats are already very motivated to come out and vote against President Trump's side. The Republicans are the ones that we've been worried are moribund in a midterm election. But remember, President Trump would not be President Trump if it weren't for Antonin Scalia's seat on the Supreme Court. That's what motivated a lot of Republicans to come out and support President Trump, even under circumstances where a lot of them weren't all that enthusiastic about President Trump. So I think, I'm not a political expert, but to my mind, seeing what happened 2 years ago, this can only help the Republicans.
And real quick, before we move on to another important topic, your thoughts about going forward. We thought we were going to have a hearing on Thursday and then maybe a vote on Friday or Monday of next week. Now with one, maybe two more accusers and things have to be investigated, what does the timeline look like to you?
Brian, the more delay there is, the more delay there will be. There should have been a vote on this last Thursday. There is more than enough information at this point for the better and worse to cast a vote on this nominee. As Steve mentioned a second ago, what we're dealing with is a very, very thin margin in the Senate. So for that reason, Senator Grassley is understandably proceeding with caution. But the problem is, if he allows this delay to take hold with this idea that no matter how thinly supported a serious allegation is, that's a basis for more investigation and more delay. We're never going to see this guy get a vote.
So just forge ahead. Meanwhile, the New York Times talks about this. Rod Rosenstein, you remember, suggested the 25th Amendment, wearing a wire. He said he was being sarcastic when former Deputy Director of the FBI, Andy McCabe, suggested that to him because even though he only had the job for a couple of days, he thought Trump should be tossed out. So we don't know where that's going, but we know this. When Geraldo got a radio show, he got the president on and he asked him about this. Listen.
It's a very sad state of affairs when something like that can happen. We are looking at it, and it is, he was hired by Jeff Sessions. I was not involved in that process because, they go out and they get their own deputies and the people that work in the department, and Jeff Sessions hired him.
So he's blaming Jeff Sessions for all this.
Yeah, I'm very sorry to hear the president say that. Put on your big boy pants. He's a Trump nominee. And the problem here is he's always been a guy who cultivated his good relationship with the Democrats. He thought when he wrote this memo, which was used to oust Comey, that people were going to be cheering and applauding that. He was taken aback by the blowback from that. And he's been trying to get into their good graces or back into their good graces ever since. He did it by talking about the 25th Amendment. He did it by talking about wiretapping the president. And he did it by appointing a special counsel under circumstances where there was no legal basis to do that.
But the president's right. He did. It wasn't his pick. He doesn't even know him. He doesn't know anybody. He's a business guy. He's counting on people to put people in their position that are going to do a good job and not try to kiss up to one party or the other.
No, I don't buy it. You either, you're the president or you're not. He's the guy. He's the main guy. He appointed these guys. He's a Trump nominee, and it's his administration. Stop blaming everybody else.
All right. Andy McCarthy joining us from his remote location. Andy, thank you very much. Have a great week.
Thanks a lot.